sexual harassment of Asian families in London, including the recent spate of fires at Asian homes. 3 armed men hijacked a post office van outside a sub-post office in Carshalton today. The van's crew were threatened with shotguns, but later they were found unharmed in their vehicle nearby. The raiders escaped with some cash bags. Part of Ford's Dagenham car factory was evacuated tonight because of a chemical spillage. Fumes built up in the paint trim shop when 20 gallons of bleach were overturned. The building of Luton's artificial football pitch is behind schedule because of the bad weather, but the club are still confident it'll be ready for the start of the football season. The cost of the pitch is being met by a sponsorship deal with Bedford Trucks, worth £750,000. Finally, a man went back to work today 6 months after an operation to transplant his heart and lungs. Andrew Whitby's workmates at British Home Stores in Kingston put out a welcome banner and made him a cake. But the doctors say he can't eat a box of chocolates he got as a present. And Thames weather. Tonight, dry and cloudy. Tomorrow, dry at first, but there'll be rain later. The high 19 degrees Celsius, that's 66 Fahrenheit. And that's it. More Thames news tomorrow. Now, Unit 731.
This man is Japanese General Shiro Ishii. For 7 years, he headed a vast secret organization known as Unit 731. Unit 731 manufactured and developed deadly bacteria for use in war. They made anthrax, typhoid, and plague. To study and perfect the killing capacity of these biological weapons, General Ishii experimented on more than 3,000 human beings, including Allied prisoners of war. Yet, unlike his Nazi counterparts, such as Dr. Mengele, Ishii did not have to scuttle away into the depths of a South American jungle at the war's end. Instead, his crimes went unpunished, and he lived out his days quite peacefully here in Japan. Why was that? Why were Ishii and other members of his team permitted to get away with murder? The answer reveals the full horror of the work of Unit 731 and implicates the Japanese and Allied governments at the highest levels.
The bodies were put up on autopsy tables, and then they would cut them open and so forth and get their organs, or parts of organs, whatever they wanted, and they put them in the containers that were marked with the same number as was on the POW tag.
What particular organs were they concentrating on?
It looked like deep in the stomach, so it was part of the small intestine, and looked like pancreas and lung and brain.
And brain as well.
Brain as well.
Frank James is one of a group of American prisoners who believe the Japanese experimented upon them during the last war. The experiments began in a prisoner of war camp in Manchuria in 1942. The Japanese scientists used chemical sprays, injections, blood samples, and rectal smears.
They come through and they had everybody bent over and they had little glass rods. And they got one of them shoved up their rear end, you know. And the Japs had so much fun doing it. I remember that.
I was pretty sick, and I wouldn't go to the hospital because nobody that went in ever came out. I've told people, when they said, well, Charlie, you didn't die, why so many others? I said, well, maybe I got placebos and they got the shots.
I was lying in my bunk in the barracks, and this Japanese, I thought he was a guard. He came in and he had a feather, and he run that feather up and down under my nostrils. And then I discovered that this was one of the methods that they used to get prisoners to ingest bacteria. From the time I've come back, I've suffered with fevers. And then I went to doctor after doctor, went to specialists, and they can't determine what it is.
What did you think the purpose of all this was, Frank?
I thought they were researching us, you know.
They measured our skulls, our height. That's when they took our blood test also.
Why did you think at the time they were measuring you and taking blood tests?
I have no idea. They done many strange things that we never could understand.
But if these Americans were experimented upon, none of the scientists responsible was ever prosecuted for war crimes. A secret deal at the end of the war, involving General Douglas MacArthur, prevented the Japanese being brought to justice. The deal was struck by this man, a former US intelligence officer, Colonel Murray Sanders. This document, seen here for the first time, lies at the heart of the deal. Germ warfare secrets in return for immunity from prosecution for Ishii and his men. Today, what does Sanders think of the deal?
I think it was a mistake. But my only excuse is that we never would have obtained the data that we got if we hadn't done something like that.
Ishii's interest in gas and germ warfare grew from decisions taken at a meeting of the League of Nations in Switzerland in 1925. 29 nations signed a protocol prohibiting the first use of bacteriological methods of warfare. 6 nations failed to ratify the agreement, among them Japan. And from this debate, in the mind of Shiro Ishii, was born an idea that colleagues who worked with him later watched grow into an obsession.
I had the impression that Commander Ishii saw this as a means whereby Japan could conquer the world. At that time, of course, the atomic bomb had not been invented, and the matter of whether the world could be conquered by biological warfare was a topic of much debate.
General Ishii's logic was simple. If the rest of the world had banned gas and germ warfare, Japan should have that capability. Besides being a soldier, Ishii was a brilliant bacteriologist. In the 1930s, he set up a small laboratory here at the Army Medical College in Tokyo. There was little support for his ideas on germ warfare, but he was asked to design a pump to purify water. The work quickly had a practical value, as Japan's military ambitions became evident. In 1931, Japan overran Manchuria. Their armies threatened both Russia and China. In 1935, a single incident played into Ishii's hands. Cholera ravaged the Japanese troops. The army blamed a group of spies, caught carrying glass bottles and ampoules containing the germs of dysentery, cholera, and anthrax. With these germs, said the Japanese, the spies had poisoned the wells of drinking water. "2,000 horses and 6,000 men died. The Kwantung Army generals decided they needed protection from germ warfare. Their troops must never again be so vulnerable. Within a matter of months, Ishii was given huge funds to build the world's first major germ warfare installation. It would be in Manchuria at a village called Pingfan, about 40 miles south of Harbin. It would shelter under the innocuous title of the Anti-Epidemic Water Supply Unit, or Unit 731. By 1939, Pingfan was a sprawling cluster of laboratories and living quarters, a garrison of 3,000 scientists, technicians, and soldiers. Top civilian scientists were secretly drafted there to join the Korea Army doctors. Here, the bacteria of typhus and tetanus, anthrax and smallpox, salmonella and glanders were nurtured and grown in huge vats. Ishii's unit could produce up to 8 tons of bacteria a month, but crucially, he needed to draw a veil of secrecy around his work. So he recruited many of the men and women who ran Pingfan from this village, Kamo, near Tokyo. Kamo was Ishii's family home. He was the major local landowner, and in taking his villagers with him to Pingfan, he ensured both loyalty and secrecy. Around 500 of them went. They've never spoken to outsiders about it to this day. Ishii also recruited his 2 brothers. Mitsuo he put in charge of the animals to be bred for experiments. Takeo controlled what Ishii described as his secret of secrets. In Pingfan, 3 buildings were enveloped by the strictest security. Men entered and left there through a tunnel, usually at night. Hundreds of prisoners were directed to Ping Fan, so-called spies who'd allegedly poisoned the wells, Chinese, Korean, Manchurian and Russian soldiers, petty criminals and dissidents. Ishii gave these men a code name, Marutas. Literally it means logs of wood. They were known only by numbers. They were to die painfully and anonymously in their thousands, sacrificed in a series of human experiments. In a graveyard in Tokyo there stands a memorial not to those who died at the hands of Unit 731, but to the Japanese who killed them. Naoji Uezono was a member of Unit 731 for 4 years. He remembers the thousands of human guinea pigs who died in the experiments. He was a unit printer. He read the most secret records as he printed them.
There was a standing order that there should be 60 to 80 Marutas in the unit at all times, so facilities were large enough to accommodate that number. There was a Maruta supply camp, and replacements came as those in the unit died. To the best of my knowledge, the number of prisoners called Marutas sacrificed there up until the end of the war was 2,500 to 3,000.
Naoka Ishibashi, now a caretaker, was servant to a senior officer in Unit 731. He also had a more sinister duty.
My job was to ensure that Marutas were fit for experimentation, and I had to give them health checks on arrival, which included taking their blood count, ensuring healthy kidney function, and so on. The number of Marutas arriving at any one time was usually 5 or 6, but they were not used immediately for experiments, because basic examination had to be completed before this could be done.
Sometimes Unit 731 cooperated with other units. This man agreed to talk anonymously about one such joint operation.
We experimented with cyanide gas in small bombs. Nearly 100 Maruta were used in the experiment, and they all died but for one. The bodies were loaded into trucks, 10 or 20 at a time, and transported to Haruarushan, where tents had been erected for a pathologist to carry out a pathological autopsy. I waited outside the tent to obtain the blood that had been recovered from various organs of the autopsies and placed in tubes, and took these to the military hospital in Hera and assessed the cyanide content of the blood.
The prisoners were killed to assess the progress of various diseases. They were shot or injected with morphine. Some were dissected while they were still alive. But on at least one occasion, the Marutas, these logs of wood, fought back.
One day, when the duty guard went into a cell to serve a Maruta his lunch, the Maruta, who should have been handcuffed and manacled, had somehow broken the chains and had struck the guard with one of them as he entered. He only sustained a superficial cut and promptly rang the alarm bell. So I grabbed a rifle and gas mask and was one of the first to arrive at the troubled building. The disturbance was being caused by would-be escapees on the 2nd floor, and when we arrived, we tried for an hour to calm them down and have them return to their cells, but they showed no inclination to do so. Then an officer came and, remarking that it was futile, ordered we use gas. We injected gas into the cells for almost an hour until they had all succumbed, and although the riot started in building number 7, the same action was taken against building number 8.
That day, 60 prisoners died. In Ishii's eyes, the human experiments had been justified to protect the Japanese troops from germ warfare. But all along, he'd also been developing germ warfare as an attacking weapon. US intelligence documents reveal that he built both bombs and shells filled with germs. But when this bomb exploded, the charge was so great it destroyed much of the bacteria. He tried a balloon bomb, but its fuse was unreliable, and it failed to explode at the altitude that would have spread the germs most effectively. Next, Ishii invented this bomb, the Uji bomb. It was made of ceramic so that the charge to break the casing could be small, but the fins were unreliable. The bombs were tested on experimental stations near Ping Fan. Here, they exploded both bombs and shells near prisoners they'd staked out in a huge open field. Documentary proof of this series of experiments turned up surprisingly 40 years later in Tokyo. One day in 1984, Professor Matsumura was browsing with a friend through the shelves of second-hand books when they found a set of remarkable papers. These are the actual scientific record of a number of killings, chronicled by the Japanese scientists who carried out the experiments in Unit 731. On this occasion, the prisoners were murdered with mustard gas. Professor Matsumura, how many men were actually involved in this particular series of experiments in Unit 731?
20 men were involved.
How far away from the center of where the gas bomb exploded were these men placed?
I'll show you a map. These are the Maltas. 5 Maltas were located.
And each has a number, I see.
Yes, and this is the direction of gas.
How were the men dressed during these experiments?
Some were exposed without the gas masks, and some were with gas masks, and some were under shelter, and they were located in different conditions.
You found another document. What does that one tell you?
This document shows that 14 cases of the germ of tetanus were given, injected into the heels of Maltas. In case of Malta number 691, he was dead after 5 days after the experiment.
What about Maruta number 991?
Yes. In this case, 10 days after the experiment, the tension of muscle was near zero.
Near zero?
Means
so 10 days after the experiment,
he was dead.
When you die from tetanus, as these men did, you do so in excruciating agony. The name on the front of the document is Neo Ikeda. So I tried to find Dr. Ikeda. With my interpreter, we finally tracked him down. He is today running a clinic specializing in blood disorders in a suburb of Osaka. Is Dr. Ikeda there?
I think so. イギリスのテレビのものなんですが、池田先生でいらっしゃいますか？ちょっとお話を伺いたいんですが。
Would you tell Dr. Ikeda that we're from British television? I spoke to him on the telephone, and I'd like to talk to him about his work in Manchuria.
すぐ5分で終わりますので、満州時代のお話をちょっと聞かせていただきたいんです。もうちょっとかな。He's too old to talk about.
Does he remember? Does he recognize these? Does he recognize?
じゃあ一言だけこの書類に見覚えあるかだけ教えてほしいんですけど。
About his work in Manchuria. On tetanus experiments.
破傷風の実験についての。
But that's But would you ask the doctor why he doesn't want to talk about his work? From reliable sources, we've assembled a list of doctors and scientists who worked for Unit 731. One was Hisato Yoshimura. He was the man in charge of many of the frostbite experiments. He literally froze people to death. Yoshimura is now a professor at Kobe Women's University, and in 1978 he was awarded one of Japan's highest honors, the Order of the Rising Sun.
I made a brief visit to the frostbite laboratory. In there was a freezer chamber having a temperature of minus 50 degrees centigrade, in which 2 white Russians, without any clothes on at all, totally naked, were inside the chamber hugging one another. Observations were being made of them, and they ultimately died.
We telephoned Professor Yoshimura at his home in Kyoto. He refused to come to the phone, so we went there to question him about his activities in Unit 731. His wife emerged to meet us.
Good morning. こちらイギリスのテレビ局のものなんですが、吉村先生いらっしゃいますでしょうか。どんなご用でございますか。ちょっとお話を伺いたいことがあります。He's still in bed. He had a very bad cold.
When he gets up, do you think he would talk to us about it?
お目覚めになったらお話ししていただけますでしょうか。多分そのことについてはお話ししないと思います。She doesn't believe he would talk to you.
So where is Professor Kozo Okamoto? He was one of 5 pathologists at Pingfan. He dissected prisoners while they were still alive. Today, he's medical director of Kinki University, Osaka, and emeritus professor at Kyoto University.
I worked in the printing and research section, and this was located in the headquarters building. At a remote end of the 2nd floor of that building was a comprehensive specimens laboratory, in which there were, as far as I can remember, 150 to 200 specimens in alcohol, lined up in the room ranging from complete body specimens, limb specimens, and all extremity specimens.
Again, we telephoned the professor and followed by visiting his house in Kyoto. His daughter-in-law came out. Once again, the message was clear. Professor Okamoto didn't want to remember the dissection experiments he'd carried out on human guinea pigs in Unit 731. But however reticent they may be today, and many never told even their families the work they'd done, these men, the officers and scientists of Unit 731, stand accused of war crimes so horrific that, on the other side of the world, they would have resulted in prosecution by the Allies at Nuremberg. Many of the leading members of Japan's scientific community were involved in the work of Unit 731. Dr. Hideo Tanaka was a plague expert. He became director of Osaka County University's School of Medicine. Dr. Yukimoto Yagesawa worked on ways of spreading diseases on wheat. He became secretary of the Japanese Penicillin Association. Dr. Taziomaru Ishikawa was a pathologist. He became a professor at Kanazawa University. He secretly took to the university specimens of his human experiments. Dr. Takeo Tamiya was Unit 731's recruiting officer. He became emeritus professor at Tokyo University and president of the Japanese Medical Association. By our calculations, around 10,000 people connected with Ishii's units slipped back into Japanese society at the end of the war and kept their mouths shut about what they'd done and seen. One of them is now emeritus vice president here at the Kitasato Hospital and Research Institute in Tokyo. His name, Dr. Shiro Kasahara. I got in to see Kasahara. He's written many medical publications, some of them, I told him, undoubtedly based on his human experiments at Pingfan. Kasahara understands a little English. He agreed to an interview on his work at Pingfan, provided he could answer in Japanese. Kasahara was recruited by General Kitano, who took over Unit 731 when Ishii was recalled to Japan.
Mr. Kitano was a professor of the University of Manchuria, and so he had a natural interest in medical research. He said that he earnestly wished for me to take part in the Songo fever research, and so, reluctantly, I went to Manchuria in 1941. In addition to myself, Mr. Ishii had gathered the most proficient people from universities and research laboratories, professors, assistant professors, directors, and assistant directors. For those that would not agree to joining him, he arranged that they should receive red papers, which meant they were conscripted into the unit. In the year I was with them, the Ishii unit was ordered to carry out research into a mysterious disease that was affecting soldiers. So officers and the technicians, the brilliant people from the universities and laboratories, and myself, went to a place called Songo near the Soviet border. When I arrived there, I found their work involved obtaining mites from rats captured in the area of Songo, where the disease was most prevalent. And from these they made a solution for injecting into spies captured in Manchuria. I was only accustomed to university laboratories and university-style research, and until I went to the Ishii unit, I didn't even know such a thing as human experiment existed. or what the word Maruta meant. I was very naive. One had to approach one's own administration department and receive approval of the commander to become a custodian of a Maruta. Only then could injections be made, and the total number of people I used, in all sincerity, I believe amounted to 5 or 6.
But medical papers and US intelligence reports on Songo or epidemic hemorrhagic fever bear the names of Professor Kasahara and General Kitano. They contradict the figures of human experiments that Kasahara gives. In the human experiments involving epidemic hemorrhagic fever, there were apparently 101 people sacrificed. Do you accept that number?
I cannot accept the figure of 101. I never counted them, but it is incredible. I cannot believe it.
But to experiment on, let alone to kill, even one prisoner of war is against the Geneva Convention, never mind medical ethics.
Yes, I think it was a contravention. They were soldiers, prisoners of war, and I think the Japanese army was wrong.
What about your part in the work of Unit 731? Do you have any conscience about that?
I feel very guilty about what I've done, and I think I did wrong.
So how is it that Kasahara and hundreds of scientists like him escaped retribution for their war crimes?
Beautiful hair. I wonder how old she is.
Over 40, and proud of it.
There's no age limit to looking good. Now there's Empathy Shampoo from Johnson & Johnson, a shampoo specially created for hair over 40.
You'll notice the difference immediately.
Empathy actually helps reduce breaking, brings back body, leaves hair shiny, looking full of life. Try Empathy Shampoo from Johnson & Johnson.
Now there's no age limit to looking good.
Hey, Mum, are you throwing away my trainers? They're almost new.
Well, they smell old. I'm going to air them on the windowsill for a month. Or we're going to start using super tough odor eaters.
Super Tough Odor Eaters insoles for trainers contain millions of particles of activated charcoal to absorb perspiration and destroy foot and trainer odor.
Thanks, Mum. My trainers don't smell like trainers anymore.
Super Tough Odor Eaters for trainers and regular odor eaters for ordinary shoes.
Is different. Lynx is the all-over deodorant body spray for men. Lynx is musk, amber, spice. Lynx, because first impressions last.
See the name. See the nourishment. See the dogs. Pedigree Chum. Solid, meaty nourishment. Pedigree Chum nourishment. See it. Feed it.
I've made the right choice, obviously.
Pedigree Chum. Top breeders recommend it because it's solid nourishment.
Start from Kellogg's. Enriched with 11 vitamins and minerals, glucose and honey. Start from Kellogg's. For goodness and taste, there's never been a more finely tuned cereal.
Shiro Ishii discovered what many had found before him, that to develop a weapon to conquer the world is beset with pitfalls. His germ warfare experiments at Pingfan were running into difficulties. The bombs and shells weren't working. So he turned to the humble flea and built a factory to breed them in their millions.
The fleas had been exposed to plague-carrying rats, and I think these infected fleas were scattered from aircraft. Therefore, they were used for spreading bubonic plague.
On October 4th, 1940, in Zhejiang province, this plane from Unit 731 sprayed the civilian population with fleas, rice and wheat infected with plague. On October 29th, 1940, plague broke out in Ningpo in Zhejiang province. There was another raid at Qinghua on November 28th, 1940. Another at Changte on November 4th, 1941. Bubonic plague is what was known in the Middle Ages as the Black Death. Victims swell, blacken and die. In the 14th century, there were no medical defenses against it. In China, in the 1940s, thousands of people were hospitalized. 700 died. Soon, every division of the Kwantung Army had its own squad trained in germ warfare. In July 1942, rivers near the Soviet border were contaminated with anthrax and glanders. In August 1942, 130 kilos of anthrax and paratyphoid were spread effectively in central China. But another operation went badly wrong.
They also went to central China when about 3 divisions of soldiers were dispatched together with the anti-bacteriological water supply group of Unit 731, who rapidly withdrew after an outbreak of cholera and typhus had been started with dispersion of bacteria in the area.
So secret had that operation been that the Japanese troops themselves had become the victims. 1,700 of them died, infected by the germs Unit 731 had spread to kill the enemy. By 1941, Britain and the United States were China's allies against Japan. China's leader, Chiang Kai-shek, sent a top-secret memo to Winston Churchill detailing the Japanese plague attacks. The memo alerted the Allies, Britain, the US and Russia, to the need to re-examine their own germ warfare program. By 1942, the Japanese were celebrating victory in their first clashes with American land forces. In the Philippines, there'd been an epic battle. On April 9th, Bataan had fallen. On May 6th, so had Corregidor. Apart from the dead, 88,000 American and Filipinos were captured. They quickly discovered the Japanese attitude to prisoners of war. To die in battle is honorable. To be captured is to be shamed. These American troops were force-marched for days without food and water to the ports of the Philippines. More than 1,100 prisoners, American and Filipino, died. They were herded aboard Japanese ships, and in horrific conditions, they were taken to Korea. They were joined by about 100 British and Australian prisoners of war and boarded trains to Manchuria, to a place called Mukden. It was November 1942. But why should these Americans who survived the experience have been taken all that way to Mukden?
From the time we left the Philippines, they were experimenting on us. They threw us in those hell ships, see how much we could withstand, and many of them died in the hell ships. They took us from the tropics to a cold climate, and that took its toll on the prisoners. And all this time, I feel like it was a systematic way of them testing how much the Americans or British and Australians could endure.
Major Robert Peattie was the senior British officer at Mukden. He kept a diary, and it lists a series of tests of the prisoners' blood and feces. He remembers that his captors didn't wish to discuss them.
The Japanese seemed to try to keep me out of the hospital and the sick people as far as they could without actually denying me access. They made it pretty obvious that I would be very unwelcome to pry into any sort of sickness or ill health.
That first winter, out of 1,450 prisoners at Mukden, 430 died. But were they experimented upon? What evidence is there that Ishii tried to find out if Americans and Europeans would react to germs differently from Asians and Russians? Well, Mukden is just 350 miles from Unit 731's headquarters at Pingfan, and there is clear evidence that scientists from Pingfan went to Mukden.
There were about 3,000 prisoners under confinement, and many of our scientific teams went there. And I don't know for what purpose, but they most certainly did go there. To the best of my recollection, the report which we prepared almost wholly related to malnutrition.
Jack Roberts was a sergeant in the camp hospital. He remembers prisoners being measured with calipers, series of injections and inoculations, and bodies being dissected by visiting Japanese scientists.
Well, it was pretty obvious to me that we were being used as guinea pigs for some reason that we were not aware of and we hadn't been told about it.
Who were carrying out these tests?
Well, we had this group of strangers who appeared in the camp. We don't know where they'd come from. We were never given any information. They were dressed differently to the normal camp staff. They carried out these operations, and then they disappeared and we never saw or heard of them again.
The scientists who came here most were those concentrating on the use of dysentery as a weapon of war. One of them, for 7 years a member of Unit 731, was Tsuneji Shimada. He was a laboratory technician. He lives in Osaka. He would talk to me only on the telephone.
I was in the dysentery group and we studied whether this could be developed for use in weapons. Normally we gave them infected materials to drink and carried out autopsies to ascertain the symptoms. We had to observe the progress and had to ascertain the potency of the various viruses.
Were any blood samples ever taken from the Mukden prisoner of war camp?
Yes, we also actually carried out the same experiments at the headquarters of Unit 731.
But by 1944, the tide was turning against the Japanese, and in 1945, Russia entered the war. They swept through Manchuria towards Pingfan. The advance was too rapid, even for the germ weapons Xi was stockpiling, to be mobilized against them. All evidence of the horrific work at Pingfan had to be destroyed.
First priority was the disposal of the Maruta material. After they had all been killed, their remains were incinerated. Then, for the disposal of the pathological specimens, there was special incineration equipment, but its capacity was inadequate for the job. So some of the specimens were transported to the incineration plant in Harbin. After that, each barracks was set alight, which was the job assigned to me, and all important buildings in Pingfan were destroyed by explosives laid down by a sapper unit called in especially to assist us. A small section was left behind to verify that everything had been satisfactorily destroyed.
After the prisoners had been killed and the documents destroyed, all the members of Unit 731 were issued with cyanide capsules. They were ordered to use them if they were captured. The secret of secrets had to be kept. In August 1945, the war was ended, not by a biological weapon, but by an atomic bomb. The destruction of Pingfan was complete, and Xi and his men mingled with the retreating armies to hide from justice. On September 2nd, 1945, aboard the battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay, the United States accepted the unconditional surrender of the Japanese forces. Representing the Allies, General Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Commander in Japan for the Allied powers. Representing the Emperor of Japan, the Foreign Minister, Moromoru Shigemitsu. For MacArthur, ignominiously defeated in the Philippines a few years before, it was an emotional moment.
We are gathered here, representatives of the major warring powers, to conclude a solemn agreement whereby peace may be restored. It is my earnest hope, and indeed the hope of all mankind, that from this solemn occasion, a better world shall emerge out of the blood and carnage of the past. A world founded upon faith and understanding. A world dedicated to the dignity of man and the fulfillment of his most cherished wish for freedom, tolerance, and justice.
A time then for justice, and amid the chaos of a defeated Japan, the Allies hunted for the Japanese who should be brought to trial. Ishii and his men hid and waited. Surprisingly, Ishii was hopeful. He knew the unique scientific value of the work he'd done, and he guessed correctly that America and Russia would want it.
The most technically advanced country in bacterial technology was Russia, followed by Germany and then Japan. These three countries were very progressive in this field, but America, and of course England, were not so advanced. America desperately wanted to acquire as much knowledge as possible about bacterial technology.
So even as the occupying troops arrived in Japan, Unit 731 drew up a plan to trade this valuable information. The linchpin was an English-speaking member of the unit, Lieutenant Colonel Ryohi Naito. Somehow, Naito found out which American officer would be in charge of investigating germ warfare. He got a photograph of the man, Colonel Murray Sanders, and he was waiting when the ship carrying Sanders arrived in Japan.
My mission was biological warfare. I was to find what the Japanese had done. And when the Sturgis docked dockside at Yokohama, there was Dr. Naito. He came straight toward me. He seemed to have had a photograph of me and said that he was my interpreter.
Did you at that time know that he was a member of Unit 731?
I didn't even know what 731 was. Apparently he was a very humble, shy person, very careful, went home every night, came back early the next morning. If you're interested, I found out later that he didn't go home, but went to the various Japanese headquarters.
To sort out the information that they were going to
Right.
give you the next day?
Right. And to report on the progress of our mission.
Was it his job to see to it that you didn't learn too much?
Absolutely.
So Sanders and Naito engaged in a game of bluff and double bluff. The American threatened the Japanese.
I said, not only would I be replaced by an extremely tough man, but that this would also put the communists in the picture. Now, I said that because the Japanese exhibited a deadly fear of the communists, and they certainly didn't want them messing around. He appeared the next morning early with a manuscript which contained startling material. It was fundamentally dynamite. This said, in essence, that the Japanese were involved in biological warfare.
Naito also set out the entire chain of command for the war criminals of Unit 731.
He laid out a table of organization which started with the emperor and branched off into the various departments: War Department, Chiefs of Staff, Medical Affairs Department, and so forth. All of them implicated plus or minus.
Do you believe that the Emperor was aware of the work of Unit 731?
I think he must have known something, because the budget was very large, and the people involved were top level.
A document held in Japan's military archives reveals that the unit was formed by imperial decree. That is, the Emperor's seal is on the document. We also know that the Emperor's brother, Prince Mikasa, visited Pingfan, as unit photographer Yamashita remembers.
The aristocracy of the day were all military men, and on occasion they visited us, and I particularly remember a visit paid by Prince Mikasa. I took his photograph, but unfortunately the sun was reflected in the spectacles of Prince Mikasa, and his eyes were indistinct, and Ishii said that he thought the photographic section of the Canton Army, as a mecca of science, would have the ability to rectify this by scientific means, and he strongly urged me to do so. Because of this, I remember the visit of Prince Mikasa very clearly.
More than that, the Emperor himself went to Manchuria at least once, in 1939, when the work of Pingfan was at its height. Certainly, he must have known about the garrison at Pingfan. But did he know of the human experiments?
In the Japanese system, reports on important research would have been circulated to all in the cycle, and intermediate termination of the flow is inconceivable. I appreciate, therefore, that there was much discussion about the responsibility of the emperor. But myself, I think it is ridiculous to believe that such information was not circulated to the emperor.
There was a comprehensive attempt to conceal the truth from the Allies. In the document Naito gave Colonel Sanders, there's a note tacked on the end. Sanders wrote, "I've asked Dr. Naito whether prisoners of war were used as guinea pigs. He vows this has not been the case." But did even Sanders, desperate for information, believe it?
For a very short time.
Did it, in a way, suit you to believe him when he said he didn't use human beings as guinea pigs?
Well, it made it easier for me to be friends with him.
But did it also make it easier for you to protect him in a way?
Yes, by all means.
Believing Naito freed Sanders from moral constraints. He formulated an agreement.
I looked on this document as the opening of a gate. It showed me where I could go and what to do.
Sanders took the document directly to General MacArthur. He suggested the deal to MacArthur. The Allies wanted the information from Unit 731, so could he offer immunity from prosecution in return for the Japanese data?
He said, well, if you feel you cannot get all the information, we are not given to torture. There's nothing we can do about it.
So offer them the deal.
So we offer him the promise as coming from General MacArthur and get the data. I went back to Naito and told him that we would not prosecute. I had General MacArthur's word for it. BW workers as war criminals. This made a deep impression, and the data came in waves after that.
Thick and fast.
Thick and fast. We could hardly keep up with it.
In January 1946, free from the fear of prosecution, Ishii emerged from hiding. He began to talk to the Americans about his work. He knew the Russians would also be seeking him and his information. They'd captured 12 germ warfare experts in Manchuria. Sure enough, according to this US intelligence document, the Russians did ask the Americans to release Ishii to them for questioning.
The Russians requested that General MacArthur arrange for the handing over of General Ishii to them, but Ishii went to discuss this with MacArthur, stressing that he had no intention of going to Russia. In the office of General MacArthur there was a man called General Sams, who agreed that he should not go, and said, conversely, that all the information should be handed to the Americans. If he did this, he and all the members of Unit 731 would be considered not guilty of any charge. This was clearly stated, and so Ishii took full responsibility for gathering and handing over all the information to the Americans. This is truly what actually happened.
So the bargain was struck. Yet, as MacArthur prepared to bring other Japanese war criminals to justice, there's evidence that he knew of the human experiments carried out by Ishii's units. In May 1947, MacArthur radioed to the War Department, top secret. Experiments on humans were confirmed tacitly by Ishii. Reluctant statements by Ishii indicated he had superiors who knew and authorized the program. In September 1947, again top secret, the State Department warned MacArthur and the Army and the Navy about the deal. It is recognized, they said, that this government may at a later date be seriously embarrassed. They'd already discussed that independent investigation by the Soviets in the Mukden area may have disclosed evidence that American prisoners of war were used for experimental purposes, and that they lost their lives as a result of the experiments. But MacArthur pressed ahead with the deal. Then, in October 1947, two American scientists, Edwin Hill and Joseph Victor, came to Japan to assess the value of Ishii's work. They interviewed the Unit 731 scientists, Ishii, Kitano, Kasahara and the rest. And the American investigators reported, such information could not be obtained in our own laboratories because of the scruples attached to human experimentation. The trial of Japanese war criminals, begun in Tokyo in May 1946, had already lasted a year. The indictment, read by Australian Judge William Webb, had insisted that, as MacArthur had once declared, it was time for justice.
To end the customary and conventional rules of war designed to prevent inhumanity were flagrantly disregarded. Ruthless killing of prisoners by shooting, decapitation, drowning and other methods, death marches in which prisoners, including the sick, were forced to march long distances under conditions which not even well-conditioned troops could stand, many of those dropping out being shot or bayoneted by the guards, forced labour in tropical heat without protection from the sun, complete lack of housing and medical supplies in many cases resulting in thousands of deaths and disease, beatings and torture of all kinds to extract information or confessions or for minor offences, killing without trial of recaptured prisoners after escape or for attempt to escape, killing without trial of captured aviators, and even cannibalism.
The trial ended in April 1948. It had lasted 2 years. But in the thousands of pages of evidence and depositions, there's not a single mention of Unit 731. In contrast, the Russians brought their Unit 731 criminals to trial and gave them up to 25 years in jail. But the Americans had the information they wanted, and Ishii and his men emerged scot-free. But there was another important consideration. The Emperor had escaped association with Ishii's experimental work on human beings. He never stood trial to answer for the crimes of his nation, not least because the Allies needed him to preserve some stability in a land reeling in defeat. They needed him to introduce a new democratic constitution to a newly elected parliament. There seems little doubt that the Americans and the Japanese protected the Emperor from implication in and possible prosecution over any war crime. Meanwhile, Shiro Ishii was living in Tokyo. Then, in 1948, he suddenly disappeared.
I am told that he gave some lectures, a series of lectures that included human testing of infectious organisms in a special camp in the United States. He went into detail as to the method of injection and the reaction of the prisoners, and he gave some results.
Do you know this, Dr. Sanders?
I got the information from a high-ranking officer on the condition that his name not be mentioned.
You are in no doubt in your own mind that it is true.
I believe it, yes.
The game is you buy a lot for a little, and that's what they did. They gave us a few little prisoners' death to gain a lot of knowledge for their own research programs to make bacterial stuff that they can't even haul through half of the towns of this country.
Our government should have notified us so we could have been on the lookout for any repercussions from the experiments. And I'm very disappointed in our government that they have done this.
I think it's pretty terrible, and I think our government should fess up and try to even help the few of us that are left.
Today, 40 years on, and as the extent of the horrific work of Unit 731 emerges, these American prisoners are fighting for compensation. They feel let down and angry. They're calling for a full congressional investigation. The US government may be on the threshold of the embarrassment forecast by this intelligence document 40 years ago. The congressman will find that the work of Unit 731 spread across the entire Far Eastern theatre of war. In places as far apart as Nanking and Burma, there are further allegations of human experimentation. As for the men of Unit 731, after the war, many of them prospered. Scores went to work in a new company Dr. Naito set up, the Green Cross Corporation. Naito befriended his former interrogator, Murray Sanders. He visited the Sanders home in Florida. He entertained the Sanders family in Japan.
Well, after the war, I saw many of these people, both in Tokyo and in the Green Cross blood transfusion, blood processing plant, including Kitano.
Naito had employed them, you mean?
Yes.
The Green Cross mainly works in blood, They were originally established as a blood bank in 1948. They extract plasma, albumin and gamma globulin from blood, and this is identical to the work that members of Unit 731 were doing in Harbin. So it was logical and convenient that they should employ such experienced people when and where they could find them. And that is why so many former members of Unit 731 were employed by the Green Cross.
The Green Cross Corporation has grown into one of the most successful drug companies in Japan. In 1985, its profits were forecast at more than 6,000 million yen. Dr. Naito died in 1982, a rich man. But not before he'd approved plans for this new multi-million-dollar research institute named after him to be built in Los Angeles, USA. And Shiro Ishii? Well, ironically, he suffered in his later years from chronic dysentery and internal inflammation, diseases he'd inflicted on others at Pingfan. Like them, he was to die, slowly and painfully, of cancer of the throat. It's too late now to bring many of the Unit 731 scientists to justice. But the morality of what these men did in the name of science raises questions that today still remain to be answered, just as the arrangement that protected them from prosecution could yet embarrass the governments of great nations.
Next Tuesday at 10:30, Hooligan, an in-depth report.
London in the whole lot, you know, including the Old Kent Road, Birmingham, all around here. I mean, they've all been born to fight.
What makes a football hooligan? Next Tuesday at 10:30 on Thames.
And next tonight, it's comedy with a dabble with Digance.
You can trust the dealers in Car Buyer. Car Buyer, in your newsagents now, only 20p.
One of Britain's outstanding dogs, Spring Classic by Appaloosa. Everything about him says he's got what it takes to be a champion. And this is the food his breeder recommends. Everything about it says nourishment. Nourishment you can see. Firm, meaty, solid nourishment. Pedigree Chum nourishment.
I have looked at many, many brands, and I've never seen anything better than Pedigree Chum.
Pedigree Chum. Top breeders recommend it because it's solid nourishment.
A little drop of history. And the start of a massive Esso investment program that helps keep the economy moving. We're spending £1 million a day with British suppliers. We've laid the foundations for a new petrochemical industry in Scotland. Supported 40,000 jobs in other industries. Used research to develop the quality products industry needs. Built some of the finest service stations in Britain. And made Esso's commitment to quality work as hard for Britain as it works for us. Esso. Quality at work.
McCain Menu Classics are a new range of beautifully prepared dishes that you pop straight into the oven. Wonderful recipes such as chicken Italienne, tender chunks of chicken with linguine pasta, parmesan cheese, green beans and mushrooms, sensibly low in fat, great tasting yet superbly balanced meals. McCain Menu Classics, great tasting balanced meals for working women and their men.
To give your skin a little extra care at night, now there's Night of Ulay Enriched Beauty Cream to supplement your daily routine. Light enough to be absorbed quickly into your skin, yet rich enough to really care for your skin while you sleep. Help keep your skin softer
smoother and young-looking with Night of Ulay. The beauty care for beauty sleep.
Do you have hopes of starting a business of your own? Now's the time to do it. This year, NatWest are looking for 80,000 new business accounts, offering long-term support to over 1,500 new businesses a week, or one every 2 minutes. If the time has come to get your new business underway, you know who to talk to first. Whatever your money needs, NatWest, the Action Bank.
In Wales, we have the finance to make the best of your business. So call us now.
Just as I stopped to light one of my 6-mile smooth-smoking Panama cigars, I saw it. PWP 666. £6,000 for a 6-cylinder engine and only 6 previous owners. So I bought it. And 6 miles up the A6, as I went to the aid of Sylvia's syncopating sextet, it broke down.
Panama, the cigar with 6 appeal. Well, tomorrow night at 8 o'clock, once again, we've got comedy as we take off with Duty Free. Comedy now with a certain Mr. Digance.
Good evening to you, welcome to the show, and just to start off I'm going to do a little kids song. Now this is for all the kids that are watching. I want you all to watch this, then clear off to bed so your mum and dad can enjoy the programme, alright? This is a little story about a fish getting his fin over.